The sun hung low over the Arizona territory like a copper penny pressed against blue fabric, and Clara Whitmore was on her hands and knees in the dirt when she first saw the fence posts going up across what should have been open rangeland. She had been checking on the nest for 3 days now, ever since she had discovered the small depression beneath the twisted juniper bush, where 5 baby rabbits no bigger than her fist lay huddled together, their eyes still closed, their small bodies rising and falling with each breath. Their mother had been taken by a coyote 2 nights ago, and Clara had watched it happen from her father's porch, too far away to do anything but witness the brutal efficiency of nature. But she would not let these babies suffer the same fate, not if she could help it. The year was 1882, and the land around Prescott was changing faster than the seasons. Where once there had been open range that stretched for miles, now fences were going up, cutting the territory into neat squares that belonged to whoever could file the proper papers and defend their claim. Clara's father, Thomas Whitmore, owned a small ranch on the eastern edge of town, but their land was modest compared to some of the newer operations moving in. She was 22 years old and had lived her entire life in this territory, had watched it grow from a collection of mining camps and cavalry posts into something that resembled civilization, though it still had more than enough wildness left in it to remind people they were not entirely in control. She shielded her eyes against the afternoon glare and watched as a tall figure drove another post into the rocky soil. The man worked with steady, economical movements. His shirt darkened with sweat across the shoulders and back. Clara felt her stomach tighten with worry. The new fence line was heading straight toward the juniper bush, and if it continued on its current trajectory, it would run right through the area where the rabbit nest lay hidden. The thought of those tiny creatures being disturbed or worse, crushed beneath boots or fence posts, made her chest ache. Clara stood and brushed the dust from her skirt, then started walking toward the fence line. The distance was about 100 yards, and with each step she took, she tried to think of what she would say. You could not just walk up to a man and tell him to change his plans because of some rabbits. This was cattle country, and sentiment did not carry much weight when measured against property lines and grazing rights. But she had to try. The man noticed her approach when she was still 30 yards away. He straightened from his work and pulled off his hat, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. As she drew closer, Clara could see he was younger than she had first thought, probably not much older than herself, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that were an unusual shade of green, like new grass after spring rain. His face was lean and weathered in the way of men who spent their lives outdoors, but there was something gentle in his expression that surprised her. "Afternoon," he said, his voice carrying easily across the remaining distance between them. There was a hint of something in his accent that suggested he had not always lived in Arizona, maybe Texas or further south. "Good afternoon," Clara replied, stopping a respectful distance away. "I hope I'm not interrupting your work." "Always happy for an interruption when the work is this tedious," he said with a slight smile. "Name is James Hollister. Just bought the section to the north last month." "Clara Whitmore. My father owns the ranch just east of here." She gestured vaguely in the direction of her home, then brought her attention back to the matter at hand. "Mr. Hollister, I wanted to speak with you about your fence line." His expression became more guarded, and Clara could see him preparing for a confrontation about property boundaries or water rights or any of the 100 other things that cause disputes between neighbors in this territory. "The surveyor marked it out proper," he said carefully. "I made sure of that before I drove the first post." "I am sure you did," Clara said quickly. "This is not about the boundary. It is about what lies in the path of your fence." She turned and pointed toward the juniper bush. "There is a nest of baby rabbits under that bush. Their mother was killed, and they cannot survive on their own yet. If you continue your fence line as it is, you will destroy the nest." James Hollister followed her gesture, his eyes finding the juniper bush. He was quiet for a long moment, and Clara could not read his expression. She braced herself for dismissal or mockery. She had heard men laugh about far less. "Baby rabbits," he said finally, and his tone was neutral. "5 of them," Clara said, lifting her chin slightly. "I know it might seem foolish to you, but they are living creatures, and they deserve a chance to grow. Their eyes are not even open yet. They cannot run or defend themselves. James set down the post-hole digger he had been holding and walked past her toward the juniper bush. Clara followed, her heart beating faster. When they reached the bush, he crouched down and peered carefully into the shadowed space beneath its twisted branches. Clara knelt beside him, moving slowly so as not to startle the babies. She could see them there. A small pile of gray-brown fur, their tiny ears pressed flat against their heads. "They are so small," James said, and there was wonder in his voice rather than contempt. He looked at Clara, and she was struck by the genuine concern she saw in his face. "You have been taking care of them?" "As best I can," Clara admitted. "I have been bringing milk mixed with water and some mashed greens. My father thinks I'm wasting my time, but I cannot just let them die when I might be able to help." James sat back on his heels, studying the nest, and then looking back at the line of fence posts he had already planted. Clara could see him calculating distances and angles in his head. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant call of a hawk and the whisper of wind through the dry grass. "How long until they can manage on their own?" he asked. "Another week, maybe 2, Clara said. "Once their eyes open and they start moving around, they will leave the nest naturally, but right now they need the shelter and protection." James stood and offered Clara his hand to help her up. His palm was calloused and warm, and Clara felt an unexpected flutter in her chest as their hands touched. She released his hand quickly once she was on her feet and stepped back, confused by her own reaction. "Then I will move the fence line," James said simply. "I will angle it to go around the bush and rejoin the original line on the other side. It will use more posts and take more work, but it is the right thing to do." Clara stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You will change your entire fence line? For rabbits?" "Why not?" James met her eyes squarely. "You are right that they are living creatures, and you are right that they deserve a chance. I have money for extra posts and I have time to do the work. Seems like a small thing to do when you measure it against their lives." Something warm and bright bloomed in Clara's chest, a feeling she could not quite name. She had expected to have to argue and plead, had been prepared for rejection or ridicule. Instead, this man she had just met was willing to change his plans without hesitation, simply because it was kind. "Thank you," she said, and her voice came out softer than she intended. "Thank you so much, Mr. Hollister." "James," he corrected gently. "If we are going to be neighbors, you should call me James." "Then you must call me Clara." He smiled at her, a real smile that reached his eyes and made the corners crinkle. "All right then, Clara, would you show me the best way to route the fence? You know this land better than I do, and you know where the rabbits are likely to go once they leave the nest." They spent the next hour walking the area, with Clara pointing out the paths she had seen rabbits use in the past and the places where the ground was softer and would make for easier digging. James listened carefully to everything she said, asking thoughtful questions and making notes in a small book he pulled from his pocket. Clara found herself relaxing in his company, surprised by how easy it was to talk to him. He did not treat her like she was foolish or sentimental. He listened to her observations about the land and the animals as if her knowledge was valuable. As the sun began to sink lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, James walked Clara back toward the path that would take her home. They moved slowly, neither seeming eager to end the conversation. Clara learned that James had come from Texas, that he had worked as a ranch hand for years before saving enough money to buy his own land. He had no family left, his parents having died from fever when he was 16, and he had spent the last 8 years working his way west, looking for a place that felt like it could be home. "What made you choose Prescott?" Clara asked as they paused at the point where she would continue on alone. "The mountains," James said, looking toward the peaks that rose in the distance. "I got tired of flat land, wanted something with more character." He glanced at her with a slight smile. "Though I am starting to think the neighbors might be the best part of this place." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks and was grateful for the fading light that might hide her blush. "I should get home before dark," she said. "My father will worry." "Of course." James took a step back, giving her space. Will you come check on the rabbits tomorrow? I would like to know that I'm putting the fence in the right place. I come every day, Clara said, usually in the morning just after sunrise. Then maybe I will see you tomorrow morning, James said. It was not quite a question, but Clara heard the hope in it. Maybe you will, she agreed, and then she turned and walked toward home, very aware that he was watching her go. That night, Clara lay in her bed and found herself unable to sleep. She kept thinking about James Hollister and the easy way he had agreed to help the rabbits. In her experience, most men measured the worth of things by how they could be used. Cattle had worth because they could be sold. Horses had worth because they could work. Land had worth because it could produce. But James had seen worth in 5 helpless baby rabbits simply because they were alive and deserved a chance. It spoke to something in his character, something that made Clara want to know him better. She rose before dawn the next morning and dressed with more care than usual, choosing her better work dress and spending extra time braiding her dark hair. Her father noticed at breakfast, raising his eyebrows over his coffee. You are looking awful fancy for checking on rabbits, Thomas Whitmore observed. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, weathered by decades of hard work, but still strong and capable. I am not fancy, Clara protested. This is just a regular dress. It is your Sunday dress, her father pointed out. Does this have anything to do with the new neighbor you mentioned last night? Clara busied herself with her eggs. She had told her father about James agreeing to move the fence line, but she had not mentioned how the conversation had made her feel. He said he might be working on the fence this morning. I want to make sure he routes it correctly. Her father made a non-committal sound that suggested he was not fooled but was willing to let it go. This James Hollister, what do you know about him? Only what he told me yesterday. He comes from Texas, worked as a ranch hand, and saved up to buy his own place. He seems kind. Kind does not always mean reliable, her father said, but his tone was gentle. But moving a fence line for baby rabbits suggests decent character. Still, you be careful, Clara. You have a tender heart, and not every man deserves it. I know, Papa, Clara said, reaching over to squeeze her father's hand. Her mother had died giving birth to a son who had not survived either, and it had been just the 2 of them for the past 15 years. Thomas was protective, but not overbearing, and Clara loved him for the trust he placed in her judgment. The sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky pink when Clara reached the juniper bush. She knelt beside the nest and was relieved to see all 5 babies still there, still breathing. She had brought a small bottle with a mixture of milk and water, and she carefully dripped tiny amounts near the babies' mouths, watching as their pink tongues came out to lap at the liquid. It was painstaking work, requiring patience and a steady hand, but Clara found it rewarding. She was so focused on her task that she did not hear James approach until his voice startled her. Good morning. Clara looked up to find him standing a few feet away, hat in hand, watching her with those green eyes. He wore a clean shirt today, and his dark hair was still damp, suggesting he had washed before coming out to work. The morning light was kind to him, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the breadth of his shoulders. Good morning, Clara replied, setting down the bottle. I did not hear you coming. Did not want to startle the babies, James said, moving closer and crouching down beside her. How are they doing? They seem strong. I think they might open their eyes in the next few days. Clara gestured to the fence posts she could see in the distance. Have you started the new route? At first light, James confirmed. I wanted to get the posts in the ground while the air is still cool, but I wanted to check with you first, make sure I'm going the right direction. They walked the fence line together, and Clara felt that same easy comfort she had experienced the day before. James had already begun angling the fence to bypass the juniper bush, giving it a wide berth that would protect not just the nest but the entire area where the young rabbits might venture once they were mobile. It was more consideration than Clara had dared hope for. This is perfect, she said, running her hand along one of the posts. More than perfect, really. You're giving them so much room. Figured they would need space to learn how to be rabbits, James said. Seemed wrong to fence them in too close. As they walked back toward the juniper bush, James told Clara about his plans for his ranch. He wanted to start with a small herd of cattle, maybe 20 head to begin with, and build up slowly. He had already begun work on a cabin, doing most of the construction himself to save money. His voice carried enthusiasm when he talked about his plans, and Clara found herself caught up in his vision, asking questions and offering suggestions based on her own experience growing up on a ranch. "Would you like to see the cabin?" James asked suddenly. "It is not much yet, just 4 walls and a roof, but I am proud of it." Clara knew she should say no. It was not proper to go to a man's home unchaperoned, especially a man she barely knew. But the hopefulness in James's face made her want to say yes, and she found herself nodding before caution could override her curiosity. "I would like that very much." The cabin was a 20-minute walk across rolling terrain dotted with juniper and scrub oak. As they walked, a jackrabbit bounded away from them, and James pointed out a red-tailed hawk circling overhead. He moved across the land with the confidence of someone who had spent his life outdoors, automatically choosing the easiest paths and pointing out potential hazards without seeming to think about it. The cabin sat in a small valley with a seasonal creek running along one side. It was simple but solidly built, with straight walls and a roof that looked like it would keep out the weather. James had positioned it to take advantage of the morning sun while being shaded by a stand of cottonwoods in the afternoon heat. "You built this yourself?" Clara asked, impressed despite herself. "Every board and nail," James said with quiet pride. "Still needs a floor and a proper stove, and I want to build a porch along the front, but it is mine, free and clear." Clara walked around the structure, examining the workmanship. The logs were chinked properly, the roof was shingled with care, and the single window was positioned to give a view of the mountains. It spoke of a man who took pride in his work and planned for the long term. "It is wonderful," Clara said honestly. "You should be proud." James ducked his head, looking pleased. "Come inside, I want to show you something." The interior was dim and smelled of fresh-cut wood. There was a simple cot in one corner, a table made from planks, and a few crates that served as storage. But what James wanted to show her was on the western wall, where he had used a knife to carve an elaborate design into one of the logs. It was a landscape scene showing mountains and trees and a hawk in flight, all rendered with surprising skill and detail. "I do this in the evenings when it is too dark to work outside," James explained. "Something my father taught me. He said every home should have some beauty in it, not just function." Clara reached out and traced the carved lines with her fingertips, moved by the artistry and the sentiment behind it. "Your father was a wise man." "He was," James agreed quietly. "I miss him. Miss both my parents. They would have loved this place." They stood together in the dim cabin, and Clara felt something shift between them, some deepening of connection that went beyond their brief acquaintance. When James looked at her, she saw loneliness in his eyes, but also hope, and she realized with a start that he was lonely in the same way she was, not for lack of people around them, but for lack of someone who understood them, who saw the world the way they did. "I should get back," Clara said softly, though part of her wanted to stay in this quiet space with him. "My father will wonder where I've gone." "Of course." James led her back outside, and they began the walk back toward the juniper bush. "Clara, I was wondering if perhaps you might have dinner with me sometime. Nothing fancy, just a meal. I could come to your father's ranch, meet him properly, do this the right way." Clara's heart was beating fast, but she kept her voice steady. "I would like that. And I know my father would want to meet you." "Sunday," James suggested. "I could come by in the afternoon." "Sunday would be perfect." They parted ways at the juniper bush after Clara checked on the rabbits once more. As she walked home, Clara felt like she was floating. It had been years since any man had caught her interest the way James Hollister had, and she had begun to think that maybe she was too particular, too set in her ways to find someone who suited her. But James was different. He was kind and thoughtful and saw value in things beyond their monetary worth. And when he looked at her, she felt seen in a way that made her both nervous and exhilarated. Her father was mending tack in the barn when Clara returned home. He looked up as she entered, his experienced eyes taking in her flushed cheeks and bright eyes. "The rabbits must be doing very well," he observed mildly. Clara could not help but smile. "The rabbits are fine. But Papa, James Hollister would like to come to dinner on Sunday. He wants to meet you properly." Thomas set down the bridle he had been working on and gave his daughter his full attention. "Does he now? And what do you think of this James Hollister?" "I think he is a good man," Clara said carefully. "I think he is someone I would like to know better." Her father studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then I look forward to meeting him on Sunday, but Clara, take your time. You have known this man for only 2 days." "I know, Papa. I am not rushing into anything, but I want to see where this might go." "That is all I ask," her father said, reaching out to touch her cheek gently. "Just be careful with that tender heart of yours." The next few days passed in a pleasant blur. Clara visited the rabbit nest every morning, and each morning she found James already there, working on the fence. They fell into an easy routine, checking on the babies together before walking the fence line and talking about everything and nothing. Clara learned that James loved to read but had few books, that he had once broken his arm falling from a horse when he was 12, and that he could play the harmonica but was terrible at singing. James learned that Clara had wanted to be a teacher, but there was no school nearby, that she could outshoot most men with a rifle, and that she had a weakness for peppermint candy. On the 4th day after they met, the baby rabbits opened their eyes. Clara was the first to see it, and her delighted gasp brought James hurrying over from where he had been stretching wire. "Look," she breathed, pointing to the nest. 5 pairs of dark eyes blinked up at them from tiny faces, and Clara felt tears prick her own eyes. They made it. They are going to be all right? James knelt beside her, his shoulder touching hers, and together they watched the baby rabbits begin to explore their small world with newly opened eyes. One of them, slightly larger than the others, tried to stand on wobbly legs and promptly fell over, making Clara laugh through her tears. "You did this," James said softly. "You saved them." "We did this," Clara corrected, turning to look at him. "If you had not moved the fence, they would have been disturbed or killed. You gave them a chance." Their faces were very close, and Clara could see gold flecks in James's green eyes. She could feel the warmth radiating from him and smell the clean scent of soap and leather. Her breath caught as James lifted one hand and gently touched her cheek, his calloused fingers incredibly tender. "Clara," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "Yes," she whispered, though he had not asked a question. James leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but Clara did not want to. When his lips touched hers, it was soft and gentle and perfect. The kiss lasted only a moment, but when they pulled apart, Clara felt like the world had shifted on its axis. "I probably should not have done that," James said, though he did not look sorry. "Probably not," Clara agreed, but she was smiling. "At least not before dinner on Sunday." James laughed, a warm, genuine sound that made Clara's heart feel too big for her chest. "You are right. I am doing this backward. But Clara, I need you to know that I have never felt like this before. I know it has only been a few days, but when I am with you, everything feels right." "I feel it too," Clara admitted. "It scares me a little how quickly this is happening." "We can go slow," James said, taking her hand and lacing his fingers through hers. "We have time, but I also do not want to pretend I do not feel what I feel." They sat together beside the rabbit nest, holding hands and watching the babies explore, and Clara thought that she had never been happier. The sun was warm on her shoulders. The man beside her was good and kind, and the tiny lives they had saved together were thriving. It felt like the beginning of something wonderful. Sunday arrived sunny and clear, and Clara spent the morning helping her father prepare for their guest. They killed and roasted a chicken, made fresh bread, and Clara baked an apple pie using the last of the preserved apples from the previous autumn. Thomas watched his daughter bustle around the kitchen with an amused expression. I have not seen you this worked up since you were 16 and that cavalry lieutenant came calling, he observed. That was different, Clara said, checking the pie for the third time. I was a child then, and he turned out to be a pompous fool. And this James Hollister is not a pompous fool? He's nothing like that, Clara said firmly. You will see when you meet him. James arrived precisely when he had said he would, riding a sturdy roan gelding and carrying a bunch of wildflowers that he presented to Clara with a shy smile. He had dressed in clean clothes and looked nervous as Thomas came out to greet him. The two men sized each other up for a moment, and Clara held her breath. Then her father extended his hand. Thomas Whitmore, my daughter tells me you are the man who moved his fence line for baby rabbits. James shook the offered hand firmly. James Hollister, and yes, sir, I am. Though it was your daughter who convinced me it was the right thing to do. Seems to me like a man who can be convinced to do the right thing is worth knowing, Thomas said, and Clara let out the breath she had been holding. Come on in, dinner's ready, and I'm eager to hear about your plans for your ranch. The dinner was a success. James was respectful to her father without being obsequious, answered questions honestly, and showed genuine interest in Thomas's opinions on ranching in the territory. The two men discovered they had similar philosophies about land management and animal husbandry, and soon they were deep in conversation about water rights and grazing rotation. Clara mostly listened, happy to watch the two most important men in her life get along so well. Occasionally James would look her way and smile, and each time Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. After dinner, Thomas made himself scarce, taking his pipe out to the porch and leaving Clara and James alone in the front room. They sat together on the worn sofa, close but not quite touching, very aware of her father's presence just outside. Your father's a good man, James said. I can see where you get your kindness from. He likes you, Clara said. I can tell. He would not have left us alone if he did not trust you. I am glad, James said. Because, Clara, I meant what I said the other day. I know this is fast, but I care about you. I want to court you properly, with your father's blessing. You have it, Thomas called from the porch, making both Clara and James laugh. And yes, I am listening. That is a father's right. But you seem like a decent man, James Hollister, and if my daughter wants you to court her, then you have my permission. Just remember I own several guns and know how to use them. Papa, Clara said, mortified. But James was grinning. Understood, sir, he called back. Then more quietly to Clara, he really does like me, or he would not be making jokes about shooting me. Probably, Clara agreed, fighting her own smile. They spent the rest of the afternoon together, walking around the ranch with Thomas, who showed James his operation and offered advice about dealing with the harsh Arizona summers and the occasional harsh winters. As the sun began to set, James reluctantly said he needed to head home. Clara walked him to his horse, and James took both her hands in his. Can I see you tomorrow? He asked. I will be at the rabbit nest at dawn, same as always, Clara said. Then I will be there too. He squeezed her hands gently, then mounted his horse and rode away. Clara watched until he disappeared over the ridge, then turned to find her father watching her with a knowing expression. You are falling in love with him, Thomas said. It was not a question. I think I might be, Clara admitted. Is that foolish? We have known each other less than a week. Sometimes you just know, her father said, putting his arm around her shoulders. I knew with your mother, saw her at a church social, and knew right then that she was the one. We were married 3 months later and had 20 wonderful years together before she left us. Clara leaned her head against her father's shoulder, grateful for his understanding. I am scared, Papa. What if I'm wrong about him? What if this feeling does not last? Then you will deal with it when the time comes, Thomas said. But Clara, I watched that young man tonight. I saw how he looked at you, how he listened when you spoke, how he treated you with respect and tenderness. Those are not bad signs. Give it time, but do not be afraid to trust your heart. Over the next several weeks, Clara and James saw each other nearly every day. The baby rabbits grew stronger and bolder, eventually venturing out of the nest to explore the world beyond the juniper bush. Clara and James watched with shared delight as the 5 young rabbits learned to hop and dig and find food. When the day finally came that the rabbits dispersed and did not return to the nest, Clara felt both sad and proud. "They are going to make it," she said, watching the last rabbit disappear into the brush. "Because of what we did, they are going to live full lives." James wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "We make a good team." "We do," Clara agreed, leaning into him. By this point, James's fence was complete, curving gracefully around the area where the nest had been, a permanent testament to his compassion. He had also made significant progress on his cabin, adding a proper wooden floor and a stove he had hauled in from Prescott. Clara had helped him build simple furniture, and the cabin was beginning to feel like a real home. Their relationship had deepened with each passing day. They talked about everything from their childhoods to their dreams for the future. James told Clara about his parents, about watching them die and feeling helpless to save them. Clara told James about losing her mother and baby brother, about the loneliness she sometimes felt being the only woman in her father's house. They shared their fears and hopes and slowly wove their lives together. Thomas watched the romance bloom with approval, frequently inviting James to dinner and asking his help with projects around the ranch. James always came when called, working hard and never asking for payment, though Thomas made sure to send him home with meat or supplies. The 2 men developed a genuine friendship that went beyond James's interest in Clara, and this pleased her more than she could say. 2 months after they first met, James took Clara on a picnic to a high meadow that overlooked the valley. They ate bread and cheese and watched eagles soar overhead, and when the meal was finished, James turned to Clara and took her hands. "I need to tell you something," he said, and his voice was serious enough that Clara felt a flutter of worry. "What is it?" "I love you," James said simply. "I am in love with you, Clara Whitmore. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you came walking across that field to defend a nest of baby rabbits. You are brave and kind and smart and beautiful, and you make me want to be a better man. I know we have not been courting long by some standards, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Clara felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I love you too, James. I was afraid to say it first, afraid it was too soon, but I love you so much it scares me sometimes." James cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, deeper than he had before, and Clara wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Marry me," James said, his forehead pressed against hers. "I know I do not have much yet. The ranch is just starting, and the cabin is small, but I will work hard every day to give you a good life. I will love you and respect you and stand beside you through whatever comes. Please, Clara, say you will marry me." "Yes," Clara said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course I will marry you." James let out a whoop of joy and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he pulled a small bundle from his pocket and unwrapped it carefully to reveal a simple gold ring. "It was my mother's," he said softly, "the only thing of hers I have left. I would be honored if you would wear it." Clara held out her left hand, and James slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. They rode back to the Whitmore ranch in the late afternoon, both eager to share their news with Thomas. They found him working in the barn, and when Clara held up her hand to show him the ring, her father's weathered face broke into a huge smile. "It is about time," he said, pulling them both into a hug. "I have been wondering when you were going to get around to asking, James." "I wanted to wait until I had something more to offer," James said, "but I could not wait any longer. I hope you do not think I'm rushing things." "I think you are following your heart, and that is never the wrong thing to do," Thomas said. He looked at Clara. "You are happy?" "Happier than I have ever been," Clara assured him. "Then that is all that matters." Thomas clapped James on the shoulder. "Welcome to the family, son. Now, we should talk about the wedding. Will you have it in Prescott or here at the ranch?" They decided on a small ceremony at the ranch, with just a few close friends and neighbors. Clara had no desire for a big, fancy wedding. She wanted only to marry the man she loved and begin their life together. They set the date for 6 weeks away, which would give James time to make a few more improvements to the cabin, and Clara time to prepare. The weeks flew by in a flurry of activity. Clara sewed a new dress for the wedding, simple but beautiful, in a soft blue fabric that James had insisted on buying for her when they went into Prescott for supplies. James worked from dawn to dusk on the cabin, determined to have it perfect for his bride. He built a front porch with a swing, installed shelves for Clara's books, and even carved another scene into the wall, this one showing 2 figures standing together beneath a juniper tree with 5 small rabbits at their feet. Thomas helped James select cattle for his herd, using his connections to get a good price on 20 heifers and a bull. They built a corral and a small barn, working side by side in the autumn heat. The bond between the 2 men grew stronger, and Clara often watched them working together and felt overwhelmed with gratitude that the 2 people she loved most in the world got along so well. The night before the wedding, Clara lay in her childhood bed and thought about how much her life was about to change. In the morning, she would leave her father's house and become James Hollister's wife. She would move to the little cabin across the valley and begin building a life with the man she loved. It was exciting and terrifying in equal measure. There was a soft knock on her door, and her father came in carrying an oil lamp. "Cannot sleep?" he asked gently. "Too much thinking?" Clara admitted. Thomas sat down on the edge of her bed, just as he had done when she was a child and had nightmares. "You are not having doubts, are you?" "No," Clara said quickly. "I want to marry James more than anything, but Papa, I am going to miss you." "I'm going to miss you too, sweetheart," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "This house is going to be too quiet without you, but you will only be a few miles away, and you know you can come home any time you want. Besides, I expect you and James to have me over for dinner regularly. I'm getting too old to cook for myself every night." Clara laughed, though tears were streaming down her face. "We will have you over all the time, I promise." "Your mother would have loved James," Thomas said softly. "She would have loved seeing you this happy. I wish she could be here tomorrow." "I wish that too," Clara said, "but I feel like she is with me somehow. Does that sound foolish?" "Not at all." Thomas kissed her forehead. "Try to get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a big day." The wedding took place in the late afternoon when the heat of the day had passed, but there was still plenty of light. Clara walked out of her father's house wearing her blue dress with wildflowers in her hair, and found James waiting for her beneath an arbor that he and Thomas had built that morning. He was dressed in new clothes, his hair neatly combed, and when he saw Clara, his face lit up with such joy that she had to blink back tears. The ceremony was short and simple, performed by a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through the territory. Clara barely heard the words. She was too focused on James, on the way he was looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, on the strength and warmth of his hands holding hers. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed her tenderly while their small gathering of friends and neighbors cheered. Then there was food and music and dancing as the sun set over the Arizona mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Clara danced with her father first, savoring the feeling of his arms around her one last time as his little girl. "Be happy," he whispered as the dance ended. "That is all I ever wanted for you." Then she was dancing with James, her husband, and everything else faded away. They moved together easily, as if they had been dancing together for years rather than minutes. As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast sky overhead, James and Clara said their goodbyes and rode together toward their cabin. They were quiet during the ride, both overwhelmed with the magnitude of what had just happened. When the cabin came into view, Clara saw that James had hung lanterns around the porch, creating a warm, welcoming glow. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hollister," James said as he helped her down from her horse. "Mrs. Hollister," Clara repeated, savoring the sound of her new name. "I like that." James carried her over the threshold, another tradition that made Clara laugh with delight. The cabin was spotless, and someone, probably her father, had filled it with more wildflowers. A fire crackled in the stove, taking the chill off the evening air. James set Clara down gently and looked at her with such love and desire that she felt breathless. "Are you tired?" he asked softly. "We've had a long day." "I am not tired at all," Clara said, reaching up to touch his face. "I am exactly where I want to be." What followed was tender and sweet, a coming together of two people who loved each other deeply and wanted to express that love in the most intimate way possible. James was gentle and patient, and Clara felt safe and cherished in his arms. When they finally fell asleep wrapped around each other, Clara thought that she had never imagined happiness like this existed. The early months of their marriage were blissful. Clara threw herself into making the cabin a true home, adding curtains and rugs and all the small touches that transformed a structure into a place of warmth and comfort. James worked hard on the ranch, building his herd and improving the land. They worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, never tiring of each other's company. Clara continued to visit her father regularly, often bringing him fresh bread or a hot meal. Thomas seemed to be aging faster now that he was alone, and Clara worried about him. When she mentioned this to James, he immediately suggested that they invite Thomas to live with them. "We could add on to the cabin," James said. "Build him his own room so he would have privacy. This way you could see him every day and he would not be alone." "Are you sure?" Clara asked. "Having my father live with us is a big commitment." "He is family," James said simply, "and I would not be happy knowing he was alone and you were worrying about him. Besides, I could use another pair of hands around here, and your father knows more about ranching than I will probably ever learn." They presented the idea to Thomas the next Sunday, and after some initial protests about not wanting to be a burden, he accepted with barely concealed relief. James and Thomas spent the next month building an addition onto the cabin, and by Christmas, Thomas had moved in. Having him there brought Clara tremendous peace of mind, and the three of them settled into a comfortable routine. Winter in the Arizona high country could be harsh, and that year proved no exception. They had snow in January, unusual for their elevation, and the temperature dropped low enough that they had to break ice in the water troughs every morning. But the cabin stayed warm, and with her father and husband both close by, Clara felt safe and content. It was in early February that Clara began to feel ill in the mornings. At first, she thought it was something she ate, but when the nausea continued for more than a week, she began to suspect the truth. When she missed her monthly courses, she became certain. She waited until she was completely sure before telling James. They were sitting together on the porch swing one evening, watching the sunset, when Clara took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There is someone new I want you to meet," she said softly. James looked confused for a moment, then his eyes went wide. "Clara, are you saying—" "We are going to have a baby," Clara said, unable to keep the joy from her voice. "Sometime in late September, I think." James let out a shout of pure happiness and pulled Clara into his arms, kissing her face over and over. "A baby. We are having a baby. I am going to be a father." Thomas came rushing out, alarmed by the shout, but when he saw their faces, he understood immediately. "Well, it is about time," he said gruffly, though his eyes were suspiciously bright. "I was beginning to think I would never have grandchildren." The pregnancy was not easy. Clara suffered from terrible morning sickness that lasted well into her 4th month, and the Arizona heat that summer was brutal. But James was endlessly patient and attentive, bringing her cool water, rubbing her swollen feet, and building her a comfortable chair where she could sit in the shade on the worst days. Thomas fussed over her like a mother hen, constantly trying to feed her and make sure she was not working too hard. As Clara's belly grew, James would spend hours talking to the baby, his hand resting on her stomach, telling their child stories about its mother's bravery and kindness. "Your mama saved 5 baby rabbits," he would say, and she changed my whole life. I hope you are just like her." On a crisp September morning, Clara woke before dawn with the first pains of labor. James immediately rode for the midwife who lived in Prescott, while Thomas stayed with Clara, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours, and there were moments when Clara thought she could not endure another contraction. But she thought of her mother who had died bringing her brother into the world, and she was determined to survive to meet this child she and James had created. As the sun set on that September day, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The midwife placed the squalling infant on Clara's chest, and Clara looked down at her son through tears of exhaustion and joy. He had James's dark hair and what promised to be his father's green eyes, and he was the most beautiful thing Clara had ever seen. James arrived moments later, having worn out 2 horses getting the midwife there and back. When he saw Clara holding their son, he fell to his knees beside the bed, overcome with emotion. "He is perfect," Clara whispered. "James, look what we made." "What we made," James repeated in wonder, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. The infant immediately gripped his father's finger, and James let out a choked laugh. "He is so strong." "What are you going to name him?" Thomas asked from the doorway where he had been hovering anxiously. Clara looked at James, and they had a silent conversation with their eyes. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Clara knew exactly what his name should be. "Thomas," she said, looking at her father. "Thomas James Hollister, after both his grandfathers." Thomas the elder had to turn away to hide his tears, but Clara saw his shoulders shake and knew he was moved. When he turned back, his weathered face was wet. "That is a fine name," he said hoarsely. "A very fine name indeed." Little Thomas was a good baby, healthy and happy, with a disposition that seemed to favor smiling over crying. As the weeks passed and Clara regained her strength, she marveled at how perfectly he fit into their lives. James was a devoted father, getting up with Clara during the night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours just holding his son and staring at him in wonder. The ranch prospered that year. The cattle herd grew, and James was able to sell several head for a good price. They used the money to make more improvements, building a proper barn, and adding 2 more rooms to the cabin. Life was good, full of hard work and simple pleasures. When Thomas was 6 months old, Clara bundled him up and took him on a walk to the place where it had all begun. The juniper bush was still there. The fence still curved around it in a wide arc. Clara sat down with her baby and told him the story of the 5 little rabbits and how his father had moved a fence to save them. "You will understand when you're older," she said, kissing the top of his downy head. "But your papa is a good man, the best man I know. He sees value in every living thing, and he always tries to do what is right. I hope you grow up to be just like him." "Are you telling him the rabbit story again?" James's voice came from behind her, warm with amusement. Clara turned to smile at her husband. "Someone has to make sure he knows his father is a hero." "I am no hero," James said, sitting down beside them and putting his arm around Clara's shoulders. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Clara said firmly. "You did what you would do. Most men would have driven those fence posts right through the nest and never thought twice about it. But you saw 5 helpless creatures that needed protection, and you gave it to them without hesitation. That is who you are, James Hollister." James kissed her temple gently. "And you are the woman who came walking across a field to defend those creatures. You saw worth in them when most people would have seen pests. That is who you are, Clara Hollister." They sat together in the shade of the juniper bush, their son between them, and watched the land they had built their life on. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully within the fence line that had been moved for compassion's sake. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, and somewhere in the brush, rabbits were going about their rabbit business, descendants perhaps of the 5 babies that had been saved 2 years ago. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Thomas grew from baby to toddler to boy, strong and curious and kind like both his parents. When he was 3, Clara became pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy was easier. She gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah after James's mother, and the little girl had her mother's dark eyes and quick smile. The ranch continued to expand as James proved himself to be not just a good cowboy, but a shrewd businessman. He treated his land with respect, never overgrazing, always thinking about the long-term health of the soil and water. Other ranchers began to seek his advice, and James was always generous with his knowledge. Clara's father aged gracefully, content in his later years to play with his grandchildren and offer the wisdom of his experience. He taught young Thomas to ride and rope, passing on skills that had been passed to him by his own father. Clara would watch her father and her son together and feel such gratitude that they had all these years together. When Thomas was 7 and Sarah was 4, Clara gave birth to twin boys Isaac and Jacob, who were identical and utterly mischievous. The cabin had to be expanded again to accommodate the growing family, and now it bore little resemblance to the simple structure James had built years ago. It was a proper ranch house now, with multiple bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a front porch that stretched the entire length of the building. On warm evenings, the whole family would sit on that porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. James and Clara would sit in the swing he had built all those years ago, watching their children play in the yard, while Thomas the elder smoked his pipe and told stories about the old days. One such evening, when young Thomas was 10 and beginning to ask questions about how his parents had met, Clara told him the full story. She told him about the nest of baby rabbits and how she had been so determined to save them. She told him how his father had agreed to move his fence line, giving up time and money to protect 5 creatures that most people would have considered worthless. She told him how that single act of compassion had shown her the measure of James Hollister's character and had made her fall in love with him. Young Thomas listened with wide eyes, then looked at his father with open admiration. "You really moved the whole fence, Pa? Just for some rabbits?" "I did," James confirmed, "and I would do it again in a heartbeat." "Why?" Thomas asked, genuinely curious. James thought for a moment, then said, "Because all life has value, son. Because we have a responsibility to protect things that cannot protect themselves. And because your mother asked me to, and I already knew, even then, that I would do anything she asked." Clara reached over and took her husband's hand, lacing their fingers together as they had done 1,000 times before. After 16 years of marriage, the gesture was as natural as breathing, but it still sent a warm flutter through her chest. "Also," James added with a grin, "moving that fence was the best decision I ever made, because it meant I got to spend more time with your mother, and if I had not done that, she might never have agreed to marry me." "I would have agreed eventually," Clara said, squeezing his hand. "You were kind of persistent." "I had good motivation," James replied, looking at their 4 children playing in the yard. "The best motivation a man could have." As the children grew older, they each developed their own interests and personalities. Young Thomas was steady and reliable with his father's quiet strength and his mother's compassionate heart. Sarah was bright and curious, always asking questions and wanting to understand how things worked. The twins, Isaac and Jacob, were adventurous and bold, constantly getting into trouble but always together, inseparable as 2 halves of a whole. Clara's father died peacefully in his sleep when young Thomas was 15. He was 81 years old and had lived to see all his grandchildren grow into fine young people. The family mourned him deeply but took comfort in knowing he had been happy in his final years, surrounded by love and family. They buried Thomas Whitmore on a hillside overlooking both ranches, the Whitmore land and the Hollister land, which had long since been merged into one large, prosperous operation. James carved a beautiful headstone, putting all his artistic skill into creating something worthy of the man who had welcomed him into his family and treated him like a son. The loss brought James and Clara even closer together, if such a thing were possible. They had weathered so much together, the joys of births and the sorrows of death, the challenges of building a ranch and raising a family, the endless work and the precious quiet moments. Their love had deepened and matured, becoming something solid and enduring, a foundation that could weather any storm. When young Thomas was 18, he fell in love with a girl from Prescott, the daughter of a shopkeeper. She was a sweet, practical girl named Emma, and Clara liked her immediately. The young couple was married in the spring, and James built them a small house on the far edge of the ranch property, close enough to be part of the family operation but far enough to give them privacy. Sarah, at 16, had no interest in marriage yet. She had her mother's independent spirit and had announced that she wanted to become a teacher. Clara and James supported her ambition fully, and they made arrangements for her to attend a teaching college in Tucson when she turned 18. It would be hard to have her so far away, but they were proud of her determination to follow her dreams. The twins at 14 were already taller than their father and showed every sign of becoming excellent ranchers. They could ride and rope and work cattle as well as men twice their age, and they had James's eye for land management and Clara's compassion for animals. One late summer evening, nearly 20 years after that first meeting by the juniper bush, Clara and James took a walk together after dinner. Their children were all occupied with their own activities, and it was a rare moment of solitude. Without discussing it, they found themselves walking toward the juniper bush, where it had all begun. The tree was older now, its branches more gnarled and twisted, but it was still there. The fence still curved around it, though it had been repaired and reinforced many times over the years. James and Clara stood together looking at it, remembering. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked suddenly. "Moving the fence, I mean. It cost you extra money and extra time. Did you ever wish you had just built it straight through?" James looked at her in genuine surprise. "Regret it? Clara, that fence line gave me you. It gave me our children and our life together. How could I possibly regret the single best decision I ever made? Even though it was just for some rabbits?" Clara teased gently. "It was never just about the rabbits," James said, pulling her into his arms. "Though they were important too, it was about doing the right thing even when it was inconvenient. It was about seeing you standing there, so fierce and determined, willing to fight for creatures that most people would have ignored. That is when I started falling in love with you, Clara, right there, in that moment." "I fell in love with you then too," Clara admitted. "I just did not realize it yet. But when you agreed to move that fence without arguing or making me feel foolish, something in my heart just knew that you were different, that you were special." They stood together in the fading light, holding each other and watching the land they had built their life on. In the distance, they could see their home, warm light spilling from its windows, hear the faint sounds of their children's laughter. Young Thomas and his wife Emma were probably sitting on their own porch talking about their day. Sarah was likely reading by lamplight, preparing for her future as a teacher. The twins were probably planning some new adventure. "We did good, did we not?" James said softly. "We built something real here." "We built something beautiful," Clara agreed. "A family, a home, a life. And it all started with baby rabbits and a fence." "And a woman brave enough to ask a stranger to do the right thing," James added, "and a man lucky enough to listen." They walked back home hand in hand as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The path was so familiar now that they could have walked it blind, but they took their time, savoring the evening air and each other's company. When they reached the porch, they found all four of their children waiting for them. "We thought you got lost," Sarah said with a smile. "Just taking a walk down memory lane," Clara replied, climbing the porch steps. "Mama was telling me more stories about the rabbits today," Jacob said. He was the more thoughtful of the twins, always wanting to understand the deeper meaning behind things. "She said those rabbits taught you and Pa about love." "In a way they did," James said, sitting down in the porch swing and pulling Clara down beside him. "They taught us that love means putting someone else's needs ahead of your own, that it means making sacrifices big or small for the things and people you care about. They also taught us that small acts of kindness can have big consequences," Clara added. "If your father had not moved that fence, those rabbits would have died. But more than that, we might never have gotten to know each other. Our whole life together started because of one small act of compassion." Young Thomas, mature now at 19 and a husband himself, nodded thoughtfully. That is a good lesson. I want to remember that when Emma and I have children of our own. I want to teach them to value all living things, Guy, the way you taught us. You will be a wonderful father, Clara said, reaching out to squeeze her eldest son's hand. You already have the most important quality, a kind heart. As the evening deepened into night, the family sat together on the porch, talking and laughing and enjoying each other's company. This was what Clara and James had built together. Not just a ranch or a house, but a family rooted in love and kindness and respect for all living things. Later, after the children had all gone to bed, Clara and James remained on the porch swing, moving gently back and forth in the cool night air. I have been thinking, James said quietly, maybe we should plant something special near that juniper bush, something to mark the place where our life together began. Like what? Clara asked, intrigued. I was thinking flowers, wildflowers, like the ones I brought you on our wedding day. We could plant them all around the area, create a sort of living memorial to those 5 little rabbits who brought us together. Clara turned to look at her husband, seeing the same thoughtful, compassionate man she had fallen in love with 2 decades ago. Time had added lines to his face and silver to his hair, but his green eyes still sparkled with kindness, and his smile still made her heart flutter. I think that is a perfect idea, she said. We could make it a family project. All of us could help plant the flowers. They did exactly that. The following spring, the entire family spent a weekend planting wildflowers around the juniper bush. Young Thomas and Emma came from their house to help. Sarah took a break from her studies. The twins dug holes with enthusiasm bordering on recklessness, sending dirt flying in all directions. Clara and James supervised and planted, working side by side as they had done for 20 years. When the planting was finished, they all stood back to admire their work. The flowers would take time to grow and bloom, but already the area looked special, set apart and sacred. This is good, young Thomas said, putting his arm around Emma. This way, we will always remember where it all started. And future generations will know the story too, Sarah added. She had brought her journal and had been writing down the whole tale of the rabbits and the fence. I am going to make sure this story gets passed down to all our children and grandchildren. The flowers bloomed that summer in a riot of color, yellow and purple and red and white, attracting butterflies and hummingbirds and, yes, rabbits. Clara would often walk to the spot and sit among the flowers, feeling connected to that long-ago day when everything had changed. Sometimes James would join her, and they would sit together in companionable silence, no words needed after so many years together. The years continued to roll by, bringing changes and challenges, but also joy and growth. Young Thomas and Emma had 3 children, making Clara and James grandparents. Sarah finished her schooling and took a teaching position in Prescott, where she met and eventually married a lawyer. The twins both married within a year of each other, Isaac to a rancher's daughter from a neighboring county, and Jacob to a woman he met at a church social in Prescott. Clara and James watched their family expand with deep satisfaction, knowing that the values they had instilled in their children were being passed on to the next generation. All their grandchildren learned the story of the baby rabbits, and they all learned to respect and value all living things. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the family threw Clara and James a huge celebration. All their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch, along with friends and neighbors from miles around. There was food and music and dancing, and as the sun set, young Thomas stood up to make a speech. 25 years ago, he began, my parents started their life together with a simple ceremony not far from where we are standing. But their story really began a few months before that, when my mother walked across a field to ask a stranger to help save some baby rabbits. My father could have said no. He could have told her it was foolish to worry about something so small and insignificant, but he did not. He saw the value in those tiny lives, and more importantly, he saw the value in the woman who was asking for help. He paused, looking at his parents with obvious affection. Everything we have, Everything we are as a family started with that moment of compassion. Pa moved his fence line, and in doing so, he moved Mama's heart. They built this ranch together, raised us kids together, and created a legacy of kindness and decency that I hope we can all live up to. So please join me in toasting my parents, the best people I know. May they have many more years of health and happiness together. Everyone raised their glasses, and Clara felt tears stream down her face. James wrapped his arm around her and pulled her close, and they stood together surrounded by the family and life they had built. "Not bad for a chance encounter over some rabbits," James whispered in her ear. "Not bad at all," Clara agreed, laughing through her tears. As they grew older, Clara and James gradually turned over more of the ranch operations to their children and grandchildren. Young Thomas proved to be an excellent manager with the same combination of business sense and compassion that his father had shown. The twins ran the day-to-day cattle operations, and even Sarah, though she lived in Prescott, came out regularly to help with the books and paperwork. Clara and James spent their later years much as they had spent their early ones, together walking the land they loved, sitting on their porch in the evenings, and cherishing each moment they had. They both remained healthy and active well into their 60s, still taking long walks and occasionally helping with ranch work when they felt up to it. One spring morning when Clara was 65 and James was 67, they walked together to the juniper bush, as they had done countless times before. The wildflowers they had planted years ago had naturalized and spread, creating a beautiful meadow of color that bloomed reliably every year. The juniper tree itself was ancient now, gnarled and twisted, but still standing strong. "Do you remember what you said to me the first time we came here together?" James asked, as they sat down in the soft grass among the flowers. "I said a lot of things," Clara replied with a smile. "You will have to be more specific." "You said the rabbits deserved a chance to grow," James said, "that they were living creatures with value, even though they could not defend themselves." "I remember," Clara said softly. "I have thought about that a lot over the years," James continued, "about how all of us deserve a chance to grow, to become who we are meant to be. Those rabbits got their chance because you cared enough to ask for help, and because I was smart enough to listen. We got our chance because we were brave enough to follow our hearts. Our children and grandchildren have their chances because we built something solid for them to stand on." Clara reached over and took his hand, their fingers intertwining automatically after 45 years of marriage. "We have had a good life, haven't we?" "The best life," James confirmed. "And it is not over yet. We still have years ahead of us, Clara. Years to watch our grandchildren grow, to maybe meet some great-grandchildren, to keep building on what we started." He was right. They had several more good years together, years filled with family gatherings and quiet moments, with laughter and love and the deep comfort of knowing you are exactly where you are supposed to be with exactly the person you are meant to be with. Clara was 70 when James died. It was peaceful, in his sleep, on a warm summer night. One moment he was there beside her, breathing softly, and the next he was gone. Clara held his hand and cried, her heart breaking even as she felt gratitude for all the years they had been given together. The funeral was huge, with people coming from all over the territory to pay their respects. James had been beloved, known for his fairness, his kindness, and his unwavering decency. Story after story was told of how he had helped someone, had shown compassion, had done the right thing even when it cost him. Clara stood strong through it all, supported by her children and grandchildren. They buried James on the hillside next to her father, overlooking the ranch he had built with his own hands and the land he had loved so well. In the months after James's death, Clara spent a lot of time at the juniper bush, sitting among the wildflowers and feeling close to her husband. She would talk to him, telling him about the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, about the ranch and how well it was doing under young Thomas's management. Sometimes she cried. Missing him so much she thought her heart would break all over again, but mostly she felt grateful for the life they had shared and the love that had sustained them through everything. Clara lived another 5 years without James. years in which she was surrounded by family and love. She taught her great-grandchildren to value all living things, telling them the story of the baby rabbits over and over until they knew it by heart. She sat on her porch and watched the sun set over the mountains, remembering the man who had stolen her heart with a simple act of kindness. When Clara died peacefully at 75, surrounded by 3 generations of family, her children laid her to rest beside James on the hillside. The entire territory mourned her passing, remembering her compassion, her strength, and her unwavering belief that all life had value. Young Thomas, now 53 and the patriarch of the family, stood at his mother's grave and told the story one more time. He told about the baby rabbits and the fence line, about how his father had been willing to change his plans for 5 helpless creatures, and how that act of compassion had changed the course of all their lives. They built something remarkable, he said, looking at the assembled family. Not just this ranch, but a legacy of kindness and decency that has shaped all of us. They taught us to value life, all life, and to always be willing to do the right thing even when it is inconvenient. That is the gift they gave us, and it is our responsibility to pass it on. The wildflower meadow around the juniper bush continued to bloom every spring, a living memorial to Clara and James and the 5 baby rabbits that had brought them together. The story was told and retold, passed down through generations, becoming part of the family mythology. The ranch continued to prosper under the management of their descendants, always run with the same combination of good business sense and compassion that James had exhibited. And on warm summer evenings, if you walked past the juniper bush just as the sun was setting, you might almost see 2 figures sitting together among the wildflowers, holding hands and watching the sky change colors. Just shadows, really, tricks of the light. But the family liked to think that Clara and James were still there, still together, still watching over the land and the people they had loved so well. The fence line, curved gracefully around the juniper bush, stood as a permanent reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can have the biggest consequences, that love can grow from the most unexpected encounters, and that when you do the right thing for the right reasons, you build something that lasts far beyond your own lifetime. It was a legacy of love, started with baby rabbits and a moved fence line, built by 2 people who saw value in all living things and who had the courage to follow their hearts. And it was a legacy that would endure for generations to come, a testament to the power of compassion and the enduring strength of true love.